is a profoundly problematic type of behavior and personality that is quite a defining issue of the current era. Hi, my name is Ahi Wheeler. I'm a psychotherapist practicing with Harley Therapy on Harley Street. I wanted to talk today about narcissism. It's a word that gets bandied around quite a lot, not always accurately. Nonetheless, I do think that from my observations both in the field of psychotherapy as well as looking at life from an existential and humanistic perspective, that it is a profoundly problematic type of behavior and personality that is quite a defining issue of the current era, I would say. And increasingly, we're seeing people presenting in ways that might be quite narcissistic. So a little bit of background and history first. The symbolism of narcissism comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses and is based on the character Narcissus. Now, Ovid describes Narcissus as an extremely beautiful youth who had a profound inability to love anyone other than himself. And the story goes that as a result of his rather destructive and damaging behavior towards others, a curse was placed upon him by Nemesis, who said that he wouldn't be able to love the object of his desire. So if he ever fell in love with something, he wasn't going to be able to have a fulfilling relationship. And of course, we know that Ovid then wrote about Narcissus bending over a water stream to drink water, seeing his reflection, falling in love with his exquisite beauty, and not being able to fulfill that relationship because it was a reflection, it wasn't real. And he pined away by that stream, longing for the love which he was seeing reflected in the water. And that brings us to how narcissism presents in everyday interpersonal interactions between individuals today. Now, similar to the Narcissus of the story, narcissism today presents in such a way that the person who is a narcissist or either has narcissistic personality disorder or has many narcissistic type behaviors finds it extremely difficult to fall in love with anyone else. They are deeply in love with themselves, but it's quite a tortured kind of love because it isn't ultimately fulfilling. It's based on a grandiose and exaggerated sense of themselves, and they cannot find meaningful relationship or connection to anyone else. And as a result of this, they often enact quite a series of destructive and damaging behaviors into their interpersonal relationships. Now, some of these are profound lack of empathy towards others, an inflated sense of self, as has already been mentioned, and things like rewriting history, exaggerating the impact that another person's behavior might have had on them, projecting their own behaviors and personalities onto others, and accusing the others of things that they themselves are doing. Now, understandably, this subverts the other person's reality and is deeply destructive to the other person because they start to question the verity of their own experience. So often when people come into therapy, they aren't quite sure that the experience they've had is real. They're not quite sure that that is real, and they're questioning that, and they say things like, I'm not even sure why I'm here, and other people have it far worse than me, and maybe I'm just making things up, and maybe I'm saying that it's worse than it actually was. And how do you know that what I'm saying is real? Because, that's just my perspective of things. So they overlook the profound impact that this behavior has on them, and they start to minimize and dismiss their own experience and the own hurt it has caused them, their own hurt really. And so one of the things that in therapy we would be looking at is starting to make real the experience and starting to understand what impact that has had on the person. Narcissistic behavior is often referred to as toxic, and that's not an exaggeration. Now, it's easy enough if we think about environmental toxins. We'll say if we are exposed to environmental toxins, they will have some kind of physical impact on our body. And if we are exposed to them for a long period of time, the impact of that is going to be accumulative. Now think of that in the same way for your psyche, which is your mind, the conscious, unconscious, subconscious parts of your mind. If you are exposed to narcissistic behavior for a prolonged period of time, that same toxicity is also deeply impactful on your own psyche. So the psyche of the narcissist has an impact on your psyche. And eventually, the accumulative effect of that will mean that you will start feeling unwell in your own psyche. And that will have an impact, obviously, on your psychological health, your mental health, your emotional health. And so it's really important that you're able to recognize and identify that the dynamic you have with someone who is narcissistic is going to be harmful and hurtful to you. Now, we know that that comes from a deeply hurt place within the narcissist themselves, but no lay person is equipped to deal with that, in part because the narcissist isn't going to allow you to get into the vulnerability that they have, because they have so many defenses that they have erected in order to protect and keep themselves safe. And that will take many, many forms. It'll take forms of generally finding fault and blame in the other, but not in themselves. And of course, I'm not suggesting that we blame ourselves, but I am saying that if we aren't able to take responsibility for our own behaviors when other people point out certain problematic things, we're never going to learn and be able to change that. And because the narcissist has such a fragile sense of self and ego, they've covered it up with all these behavior patterns, and they are going to resist anyone trying to deconstruct that and trying to help them see that there are problematic behaviors in place. And of course, part of that is that if you do try to say or point out any problematic behavior in them, they will unleash something that's called narcissistic rage, which is pretty much like a scorched earth response to whatever has been pointed out to them, and finding fault and blame in others because they cannot possibly see that they might be playing a part in this. And so because you're not equipped to deal with that, it's important that you try to remove yourself from the situation and get some help and support for yourself. And of course, the narcissist also is in need of help and support, but that can only happen if they are able to recognize and seek that help and support for themselves. Now, that might happen because they will see relationship after relationship not being sustained, and at some point they might think, I do need some help and support. That's fine, but you're not going to be well equipped to deliver that to them. Now, another thing to be mindful of is that if the people who have raised you, your parents, your carers, if they have either been narcissistic or they have had a narcissistic personality, behaviors, interpersonal dynamics, any of that, then that dynamic is going to be deeply familiar to you, which means that when you are out in the world seeking relationships, unconsciously you are going to be drawn to people who are narcissistic. And they are also going to be drawn to you, and they are going to see you as someone who can probably put up and tolerate that type of behavior. They'll test you at first and see whether it works. They'll push your boundaries. And if you take that, which you are likely to because it'll be familiar to you from your own childhood and upbringing, then they know that you're someone they can play out this dynamic with. Whereas if you haven't been raised by people who are narcissistic, if you've been taught healthy, good, clean boundaries for yourself, self-care, then when they test you and you react in a way that says, hey, this is not okay, they're going to realize that they might not get away with it as easily with you. So it's really important that you're able to recognize these things. If you think that you're in a relationship with someone who's narcissistic, if you think that you are in friendships where people are either taking advantage of you, exploiting you, using you, where there isn't a degree of equality or reciprocity in how much input people are putting in, just bear in mind that these are all the hallmarks, that you'll be feeling used in some way, but not quite as though you're getting something in return. And no relationship is 50-50, I'm certainly not suggesting that, but overall there's a balance of feeling loved and cared for by others and us giving love and care to others. And if you find you're in a position where you're doing the majority of the giving, But when you ask, somehow that isn't forthcoming. These are all the signs that you need to pay attention to, because you're suffering in something that isn't healthy for you. So by all means, reach out, seek help and support, firstly for yourself, and also in order to remove yourself from something that is potentially damaging and toxic to you, in order for you to heal and become more healthy in your own life. I hope this has been helpful to hear.